All right, so far we've talked adding, subtracting, and multiplying with our decimals. So the last step that we need to talk about is dividing with decimals. So let's say our first example we're going to look at is 16 and 20 hundredths divided by 4. We're going to set this up just like we normally would if we were doing long division. So our 16 and 20 hundredths would go inside. Our 4 is going to go on the outside of our division sign. Okay, at this point we have a whole number on in the front of our division sign, so we don't need to do anything with our decimal. We'll talk about what to do if we have a decimal with our number in the front of our division sign later. Since we have a whole number here and we know the decimal for any whole number goes after or to the right of that number, we don't need to do anything with that. The only thing we have to do is take our decimal that's inside our division sign and we're going to make sure we line it up and put it exactly up in our answer. Okay, now where the decimal goes in our answer is really important. So as we work through this problem, we have to make sure that the numbers in our answer are lined up appropriately. So being really neat or using grid paper is important. The first thing I'm going to look at and say, does my 4 go into my 1? No, or I would say I can do that 0 times. Okay, a lot of you don't like to actually multiply this out and say 0 times 4 is 0 and then subtract that and get 1 there again, which is fine. You can skip that step, still put that 0 on top of that 1 to hold that place value so you can make sure that your decimal lines up in the right place. I'm going to bring down my 6, so now I have 16. I know that 4 will go into 16 4 times, and 4 times 4 gives me 16. Going to subtract and I get 0. Again, notice that that 4 is right on top of that 6. So all of my numbers are lined up right now. So that 4 has to be right in front of, to the left of that decimal. Next thing I'm going to do is bring down my 2. This is a step that kind of trips people up sometimes. If we want to ask ourselves how many times will 4 go into 2, well, it won't go into 2, but we need a number to show that. So how many times will 4 go into 2? 0 times. We can do that 0 times. So we need to put our 0 up here to hold that place value. 0 times 4 gives me 0. We're going to subtract and get 2. We're going to bring down our 0. 4 will go into 20 5 times, and 5 times 4 gives me 20. And we are left with 0. So notice there's no remainders. If we are multiplying or if we're dividing with decimals at this point, we're not going to we're not going to go into the part where you're going to have remainders with decimals. So at this point, we should not have any remainders. So I'm going to notice that all of my numbers are lined up at the top. So my answer here is 4 and 5 hundredths. Okay, let's look at another one. Let's say we have 119 and 6 tenths divided by 23. So now we have a bit of a larger number here. So my 119 and 6 tenths goes on the inside. My 23 goes on the outside. I have a whole number here in the front, so I don't have to change anything with where the decimal goes. So I need to take my decimal on my inside. I'm going to put it right up where my quotient would be in my answer. Okay, I'm going to ask myself, will 23 go into 1? It won't. Or I would say I can do that 0 times. Will 23 go into 11? No, it won't. I would at least hold that place value so that I know that it goes in 0 times. So now I'm looking at 119. Okay, so this is when we talked about we have to do a little bit of estimating because on the side, I don't want to have to multiply 23 times 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. That's a lot of work. So if I estimate in my head, I know that 23 times 10, and this you can do in your head, equals 230. Well, I know that that's way too big to go into one for 119. 230 is definitely too big. But I would say 119 is about half of that. So I'm going to start by multiplying 23 times 5. Because if I know I want my answer to be about half of 230, because I think 119 is about half of 230, I'm going to use about half of 10, which is 5. So I'm going to use it as my starting number. When I multiply this, I'm going to get 115. So I used some good skills here, but I kind of got lucky. 115 is very close to 119. So I'm going to put my 5 up top. Notice it's going right on top of that 9. It's important that that decimal ends up in the right place in our answer. So by putting 2 zeros there, I know my 5 is in the right place on top of the 9. I know 5 times 23, we found out gave us 115. So that's going to go underneath. When we subtract, 9 minus 5 is 4. 1 minus 1 is 0. 1 minus 1 is 0. Okay. I'm not going to bring down my decimal in my answer. The only thing I'm going to care about with the decimal is where it goes here in my quotient. So I'm going to bring down the 6, and we're going to continue dividing this like that decimal is not even there. Now I have 46. I'm thinking that 23 times 2 is going to give me 46. But we're going to double check it anyway. Oops. 23 times 2. I know 2 times 3 gives me 6, and 2 times 2 gives me 4. Okay, so I was right. So I'm going to put my 2 on top of my 6. I know 2 times 23 gives me 46. And I subtract, and I have no remainder, which is good. So, biggest thing that's different with dividing with decimals, we need to make sure to put our decimal up in our quotient, and we have to make sure that we line up our numbers on top of each one of the numbers that we're dividing by. We have to make sure we include 0 so that we know that our digits are going on the right side of our decimal. So far, the examples that we've done have a whole number here in front of our division sign, but let's say you get something that looks like this. Okay. Now we have 648 thousandths divided by 9 tenths. What we can do, and if we set this up with our division sign. Okay, what I've shown you so far is that you want to bump your decimal right up into your answer. The problem is we haven't seen a number that has a digit to the right of the decimal so far in what we've divided by. And we can't do that. Partially because if you think about it, you don't want to ask yourselves, how many times will 9 tenths go into 6? That's kind of a nightmare. So if we could think of this as a whole number, as a 9, that would be a lot easier. So in order for us to do that, we have to move this decimal as many times as we need to make this a whole number. In this case, I only have to move it one place to the right. If I move that decimal one place to the right, this will be a whole number 9. If I do that in the front here, whatever I do in the front, since I moved that one time, I have to do the exact same thing in the number that's being divided. So because I moved this decimal one time, I have to move this decimal one time. If I had to move this decimal 2 times or 3 times, I would do the exact same thing here. So now, if I rewrite this or I erase, so that sometimes people prefer to move the decimal up here so that they don't have all these arrows in the middle of their division sign. I'm going to erase mine so it's a little bit neater. But now my decimal goes here. So when we're starting this problem, we now have a whole number 9 in the front, but our decimal is in between our 6 and our 4. So when I put this up in my answer, it's now going to go here. Now I can divide exactly like I did my other problems. I can say 9 goes into 6. I can do that 0 times. 9 goes into 64. If I don't know that off the top of my head, I'm either going to multiply or I'm going to check my multiplication chart. I know that 9 times 7 is going to give me 63. So I will put my 7 up top. 7 times 9 gives me 63. I'm going to ignore that there's a decimal there. We're just going to divide out like these are, like there's no decimal there at all, because now that we've put it in our answer, we don't really care about it for this division. We're going to subtract. 4 minus 3 gives me 1, and 6 minus 6 gives me 0. I'm going to bring down my 8. 9 is going to go into 18 2 times. 2 times 9 gives me 18. I'm going to subtract, and I have 0 left over. Okay, let's look at one more where you have the number that you're dividing by has a decimal in it. Let's say we have 4 and 96 hundredths, and we're going to divide by 1 6/10. So the number that I'm dividing by, my 1 6/10, I cannot have a decimal here. I have to make sure that this is a whole number. So we want to turn this into a 16. So if it helps you to see it set up with our long division, what we're saying is this number cannot be a decimal. So I need to move this one place value so that it becomes a 16. Whatever I do here, I have to do in here. So since I moved that decimal one place, I have to move this decimal one place. So now, if I erase my arrows, I have 16, and this has become 49 6/10. So now my decimal is going to go right up in my answer. Okay, now I can divide just like I did my other problems. I know 16 is not going to go into 4, so I can show that by putting a 0 on top of my 4 to hold that place value. I'm not really sure how many times 16 is going to go into 49. So on the side, I'm going to double check. Let's try 16 times 2. 2 times 6 gives me 12. 2 times 1 gives me 2, plus 1 gives me 32. I think that's going to be a little low, so let's try 16 times 3. I know 6 times 3 gives me 18, and 3 times 1 gives me 3, plus 1 gives me 48. Okay, that's probably as close as I'm going to get to 49, so I'm going to use my 48. My 3 is going to go up top. 3 times 16 we said was 48. We're going to subtract. We have 1. We're going to bring down our 6. 16 goes into 16 one time. 1 times 16 is 16. And we have nothing left over. So long division, nothing has changed. We just need to make sure our decimal goes up in our answer in the right place. And it's really important that your digits get lined up. So I have a number in my quotient on top of each number that's being divided. So if I have 3 digits here, I have 3 digits of my answer, and they should be completely lined up like that.